This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
Competition starting to get thick, it's the click, so I hope you watch your A game. A made no rain from the track when we unite and spit. This isn't A game, better bring your A game. Competition starting to get thick, it's the click, so I hope you watch your A game. A made no rain from the track when we unite.
Hey now, it's the Mike and JD show, and I'm your host, Mike Gilbert, and I'm joined as always by JD, the little cutie, Oliva. How you doing, JD?
I was wondering if somebody would refer to me as that today, and I should have known it was you. I should have known. Yeah, so I was on. I always keep my computer open during school, so I have like 10 different things open because I sit at a desk all day, and I was talking to a friend on Messenger, Facebook Messenger, and all of a sudden I get a message that says, "Hi, little cutie." And I thought it was them at first. I'm like, what the fuck? Why would you say, oh, this is some random person. I didn't know how to break it to him that I was neither little nor a cutie. So yeah, I blocked them and, moved on.
Dude, so I made the worst mistake of my life in 2020. So when I moved
a lot of bad mistakes were made in 2020, my friend.
Yes. Yeah. So when I moved to Vandenberg in I think 2017, I was in a new county. So I moved from Solano County, which is up north near the Bay Area, down to Santa Barbara County, which is more on the Central Coast. And so in 2020, I registered to vote in that county. So I moved my registration so I could vote in the local election. Because as you get closer to 40, you start caring about who your local congressman, who the city council is. You need to be in on that stuff. And so I'm so I registered to vote. I registered to vote as a Democrat there. And I made the mistake of giving the Democratic Party my phone number.
Oh,
worst mistake I've ever made in my life. Right. So I put my phone number down. And to this day, I get texts from Joe Biden. Well, not only that, now because of that, they sent my phone number out to all these spam bots everywhere. And I'll get a random "Hey Greg, how are you doing?" And it's a picture of some Asian chick. I'm just report junk and delete. Just not messing with that. I get it on WhatsApp and I get it on my Messenger all the time.
So my politics. I'm just to the left of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
And someone was being funny and decided to submit my phone number to one of the MAGA sites. So I get all kinds of MAGA spam all the time. And I have a friend who's right leaning who thinks this is fucking hilarious and they will not reveal themselves to me to who did. I know they fucking got me. It's really good too. Cause every day I have to hit stop. Every day I have to hit unsubscribe. It's such a pain in the ass and it's such a great troll job. I just wish I know who did it.
So I recently, I think I told this to you and Muse that recently, so I'm doing my absentee ballot. So I'm not voting in the local election here, but I'm still voting in Santa Barbara County. So since I'm overseas, I get to do what is called absentee voting. Believe it or not, regardless of what the Republicans will have you believe, voting by mail has always been a thing.
Yes.
It's something that I've just been doing for 20 years. So anyway, so I ended up registering as a Republican this time because I was you know what? I can't vote in the primaries in California unless I'm a Republican. So I was okay, well, I wanted to vote against Trump twice.
Good plan.
just to be petty. So I registered as a Republican and sure enough, people have picked up on that. So now I get ads from Newsmax. I'm oh my gosh. So thankfully I have not gotten I don't think I've gotten any text messages from them. I still get "Hey Mike, this is Joe Biden here." I'm just oh my gosh, leave me alone. But I'm getting a lot of ads on X and on Facebook for Republican stuff now.
Dude, ads are so weird. Michelle and I were driving the car on Sunday and we were flirting with the idea of going to Universal Hollywood for a vacation. Just flirting with the idea. We got a couple more years where Andy still wants to hang out with us. I'm we had a good time in Florida, but it was so damn hot. They were maybe we should try California. Mike, I have gotten so many Universal Hollywood advertisements on my Facebook, on Twitter, sending to my phone. Like, I just mentioned the idea in the car briefly, and all of a sudden I'm getting this targeted advertising constantly. Call that a coincidence, sir.
Yeah, yeah. Just so everybody wants to know out there, I am not like a party guy. Like I think they're all full of crap. So
They
don't
are.
come at me. Don't come at me either way. I don't like anybody. But I do feel it's important to vote, and so I always make sure that I'm registered, and that I can try to make a difference. So I think that stuff's important. But yeah, don't act like I'm some like left wing guy or some right wing guy. I am neither. I'm just a dude that wants to see cool ass wrestling and talk about aliens. Like that's all I care about.
I'm a left wing guy. You can put that stuff
Yeah,
on.
JD,
Take it off of Mike, put it onto me, because that's
yeah,
pretty
JD's
accurate.
like total lib.
Yeah. And they lived hard, I believe, is the phraseology that they like to use.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of MAGA, Toby Keith died. TNA legend.
TNA legend, yeah. I was
Yeah, TNA legend Toby Keith.
stomach cancer, I believe is what I read.
Yeah, yeah, that sucks, dude.
Yeah.
Like,
It's a rough way
like,
to go.
yeah, it's a rough way to go. But I thought, it's kind of another dark way to start the program. Like we've started
This is
pretty
what we
dark
do.
the last 2 weeks, but I told this story on Brace for Impact years ago. And so I was like, you know what? I think I need to tell my Toby Keith story. JD, I don't even know if you remember this story.
Vaguely. Go ahead.
Okay.
Here comes the train. I'm going to hit mute.
Okay. So in 2010, I'm deployed in Afghanistan, and my first sergeant comes around the clinic and he's like, hey, Gilbert, we need bodies. I was like, bodies for what, sir? And he's like, Toby Keith's playing a concert tonight, and we need a bunch of people in the crowd. Like we're not bringing Toby Keith all the way out here to Afghanistan, and like nobody goes. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure enough people are going to go to a free concert, even if they're not fans. Like, I really don't want to go. And he's like, why? I was like, because I can't fucking stand Toby Keith. Like, I had a resentment against Toby Keith from my my basic training days, because they played a lot of his songs in basic training, especially the dumb one about sticking a boot in people's asses, which he's probably never even done in his life, right? So I just felt like this guy was no one made more money off of terrorism besides defense contractors than Toby Keith. Okay, that was kind of my stance on him.
Toby Keith and Dick Cheney. Yes, that's about it.
Yeah. So they go, okay, well, look, let me rephrase this. I'm putting your name down and you're going to be there. I was like, all right, which is hilarious, because that's kind of what I do now. Like, I work as a first sergeant, so it's my job to go get people to do shit that they don't want to do. Like, that's my job now. So, and I think I've earned that right, because I have been the guy that had to do a bunch of shit he didn't want to do. To include, I was supposed to go to this Toby Keith concert. Well, later in the day before the concert comes, we end up getting rocketed. Like, a bunch of bombs just start going off. It's like I hear, I'm like, oh shit. So we, all the sirens go off. I get on my full battle rattle. I'm working in a trauma center, so I'm preparing to take on patients and this and that. And like 30 minutes go by and we get the all clear. And we're like, what the hell happened? It was like, oh, it was just like small RPG, did no damage to any buildings. Nobody got hurt. We're good to go ahead and go back to work. And I'm like, oh, okay. And they go, oh, and Toby Keith canceled this concert. And everybody starts high-fiving, like, fuck yeah, we have to go see it was like the best bombing that we ever had. Like, nobody got hurt and no structural damage, and nobody had to go see Toby Keith in concert. It was a win.
I'm not politics aside, I am not a country music fan at all. Like, I think it's something you have to kind of grow up with, and neither one of my parents were country music fans, so I've just never quite gotten into it. My wife likes country music, and I don't let her ever touch the radio when we're in the car together. So it's a rule. So, like, yeah, man, couldn't do it. But he was a big part of the founding of TNA. He was almost the owner for a brief period.
Him and Jeff Jarrett tried to buy TNA. He actually was on the very first episode, and then he was supposed to go see G.W. Bush that night at the White House. This is according to Jeff Jarrett, so this could be total bullshit, but this is just a story that's been told forever. But instead, he turned down a White House invitation to make sure that he was there at TNA. Now, look, I hated country music at the time, but for some reason, like, as I got closer to 40, I started to appreciate it a bit more. And I think we had this whole conversation about Ken Burns' country music documentary.
We did, actually.
Yeah. And I started to enjoy it a lot more. I I don't enjoy like the poppier stuff, but they do have some very soulful singers and some really good songs. And I think Chris Stapleton's pretty good. But
we just heard a Chris Stapleton song in the rest. My first ever Chris Stapleton song in the wrestling room today. It wasn't terrible. Our friend Sam put together a country music list for me. I lost a bet, so I had to listen to this stuff, and it was an experience. I'll just say that.
Yeah. But hey, guys, I didn't know when he was coming on.
Sorry.
But JD, you and I didn't talk about this, but you're in a group chat with one BJ Bethel. So I invited BJ Bethel on, and before I bring him on, I just want to give him a quick introduction. So he's a legit journalist. He's not like a couple idiots like JD and I.
Weird.
And he's not one of these loser content creators who paid their way to Vegas to go see WWE do a pep rally and then found out once they got there they weren't allowed to ask questions, which is hilarious. But like couldn't happen to a nicer group of people than the people that showed up for that thing. But he's been following this WWE scandal story pretty closely. So I wanted to bring on a guy who's like in his civilian job, he's like an actual journalist. So BJ, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for being here.
BJ Bethel.
BJ Bethel, are you there? Nope. Oh, it says he's there.
Maybe he stepped out. Maybe put him back into the thing, and then hey BJ, when you're ready to go, if something that you just text us or something real quick, and we'll close you back.
I'll pull up my Twitter, and JD go ahead, take over. I'm gonna send DJ a message.
I love being put on the spot like this. So a good buddy King of the North says, just going to make sure that Mike and JD haven't lost their minds. I feel like I'm in a better place this week with my pro wrestling fandom. Dynamite was really good last night, and the pro wrestling world is completely on fire. So I'm super entertained by all of this, right? So I think I'm in a pretty good place right now. Dude, the state series continues tomorrow. We have our sectional tournament. It's this is the big one. You win, you go to state. You lose, you go home. So we got a big weekend coming up in our school. I'm pretty fired up, to be quite honest with you. I'm going on a radio show tomorrow to do an interview for the school. I'm pretty excited.
That's awesome, man. That's really cool. BJ right now is having some technical difficulties. He just hit me up in the chat. So
okay.
we will wait for BJ. So here's what I want to start off with, and then BJ can just slide in. I'll go ahead and add. Oh, he escaped. Okay, so he'll be back. So here's what I want to start off with. And I know some people have been talking about this, but I've been saying this since like the moment it happened. The Rock returning to WWE and Cody's story is a total psyop.
Yes, you have.
They are creating a controversy to distract you from the fact that there is a sex trafficking scandal, not only with Vince McMahon, and people are pointing the finger at Vince, and he's probably the worst offender, but there's a sex trafficking scandal. Like they're being sued. The company itself is being sued. Yes. So it's not just Vince McMahon. And members of the media are in on this psyop. Some are unwitting participants, and some are very witting participants. I'm telling you right now, if you go back to Friday night, Saturday morning, and look at Conrad Thompson and Dave LaGreca's Twitter and see what they're posting, they were very much a part of this distraction. They're very it was those two guys who are popular on Twitter, who have a big following within the wrestling community. They're out there hashtagging "We Want Cody." They got this whole thing started, and the next thing you know, every single website that we have ended up following suit. Like I said, some of them are just unwitting participants in a psyop, but this is a total distraction to keep people talking about anything other than this big scandal that's going on in WWE.
And the sad part is, it's working just perfectly.
Yeah, they had 20,000 people at their pep rally today.
I love that you're calling it a pep rally. That's exactly
what it was. They called it a press conference, but they didn't allow anybody to ask any questions.
It's not a press conference.
It was a pep rally.
Mm-hmm. Rah rah, sis boom ba. God forbid Triple Nose has to answer a question. God, I hate that guy. I found people are actually liking when I get angry at Triple H. Stick around, won't take much.
Yeah. Especially, let me see if BJ is ready. BJ, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, good.
All right.
That's a positive.
Yeah, man. So BJ, you've been not only following this story that just broke, but you've been kind of on the cusp of this one for a long time, and you've been kind of like covering the seedy underbelly of not only the WWE but the pro wrestling world for 20 years. What are you making of just kind of how this thing is all playing out right now?
I think that this is probably the worst nightmare WWE could have had. This is, I mean, they got Vince, they got his phone, they got all of his communications. The criminal complaint laid out by Janelle Grant, the victim, and Ann Callis, who is a dynamite attorney. He was the first female chief judge in the state of Illinois. She's a killer, and it's bad news for them. I just don't see how this doesn't end without, a few people going to jail and a lot of people never working in the business again.
What a shame.
So, yeah, and so a lot of people think that this is just a lawsuit, but there's an actual federal investigation happening.
Yes.
And the feds, the federal, like the FBI, actually got Vince's like cell phone, and a lot of the things that the allegations are based around his cell phone activity, right?
Yes. Wall Street Journal ran this last week. I got word of it that something was coming down about the night before. But what happened is last year, people remember that there was a release by WWE. It was after the second quarter saying that there was a grand jury seated in federal court, and it was looking over activities involving Vince McMahon. And at the time, people believed this had to do with the payoff issues and the Securities Exchange Commission investigations about, because post Janelle Grant, he paid a payoff to Rita Chatterton, who's believed to be he was one of the victims in 1986. She's a former female referee there, and there was somebody else that was undisclosed from around the mid 2000s. Well, that wasn't the case. This was they were looking into rape charges, sexual assault, and sexual trafficking. Very similar to the allegations brought by Miss Grant. And it's been seated since last June. So I've asked the law firm, I've asked other people what's going on with the federal charges. They won't give me any answers. But the fact that, that somebody from the feds have been talking about it since June, it tells me that, they're probably in a lot of trouble. This isn't just a lawsuit. You pay money, you go away. This is now federal criminal grand jury stuff. This is something where somebody's going to prison probably.
Yeah, and say they do settle the lawsuit, right? And Vince pays a bunch of hush money, which is what his MO is. You're not immune. Like federal investigators can get copies of those NDAs and use those against you, right? Like those are submissible in court. Am I right?
Yeah, in criminal court, an NDA means nothing. If anything, It just shows a way. It gives them a trial. It gives them a paper trail to go back and talk to witnesses. This was a situation that happened in the steroid trial. Emily Feinberg, who was one of Vince McMahon's secretaries, she was called the witness, and she had signed a non-disclosure agreement. And like many of Vince's secretaries at the time, she signed an NDA, and she ended up having to testify because it was in criminal court. If you're in criminal court, an NDA doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter how much money. If they bring you in to testify and you're a witness, you better tell the truth. And it doesn't matter how much money you took or whatever. That's how it works. You can't subvert the criminal justice system that way. And the sheer narcissism to believe they could keep operating this way is just kind of crazy. I don't think anybody. I think for 90% of the wrestling world, I don't think the reality of this is hit. I was asking questions about it back in June. I'm like, okay, maybe this is payoff oriented, but what if it isn't? This is the biggest story in maybe the history of the business. And but I didn't know any better. I certainly didn't expect this. But I've been tracking a lot of this since about 2002 when I covered some, WWE, and I had sources in developmental and places like that. And I began hearing stories about Vince, going all the way back to the plane ride from hell, which ended up being multiple plane rides from hell. And it's just, I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to come out that no one's heard. But it depends on who ends up testifying, and it depends on who, if anybody joins Grant's lawsuit. Nobody else has joined it, but they are getting a lot of feedback. And I've been told by the law firm representing Grant that to stay tuned. It looks like they're going to be working something out, possibly with more victims to come forward. I don't know that for certain, but that's kind of what they implied. But to me, that's kind of a big deal. But, I feel bad for the wrestlers there. I feel bad for people not involved, but for the people at the very top, this has been something they've known about for a very long time. And I think Ari Emanuel and Mark Shapiro trying to play dumb to it, doesn't work for me either.
I mean, that can't be a surprise to anybody who's followed this business for more than a decade, right? We're talking about WWE 30 years ago. They skirted, right? The federal government went after them for the steroids thing, which they didn't really have anything on. When the Ring Boy scandal and the Rita Chatterton thing, where there was actual evidence for that, but the steroids was sexy in the 90s. So they went that way, and that was a huge mistake because all it did was embolden Vince. And if anything, he got worse, right?
Yeah. Well, the steroid trial, there was a lot of unwillingness on the part of wrestlers to testify against Vince. That was one of the things that worked in his favor. The other thing was that the FBI screwed up the prosecution. There was technicalities involved. That's kind of what saved Vince in the end. But also, you got to remember Tom Cole, who was part of the Ring Boy scandal, who was on the Phil Donahue episode in '92 that featured Dave Meltzer, Superstar Billy Graham, Bruno Sammartino, other people talking about it, the abuse that happened there. Tom Cole killed himself in 2020, a year after Ashley Massaro did. Mm-hmm. And his brother blames the stuff that happened to him in WWE for ruining his life. Now, later on, he came out and said, I think Linda McMahon tried to do right by me, and he supported her run. He supported her run for Senate in Connecticut. But, according to the brother, that's another victim that's out there. That's somebody people know about. They ended up firing somebody backstage because of what happened to Cole. So, it's there's going to be a lot of things that come out of this that come back 30, 40 years, maybe, possibly. I don't know that for certain, but that's the breadth of what we're looking at here. So we come back to the 80s, possibly.
Yeah, well, the Rita Chatterton definitely goes back to the 80s and 86. I mean, unfortunately, that's a her word versus his, and those are the hardest cases to kind of prove sometimes.
Yes.
But the stuff that's come out, I see Konstantin Kuros kind of crawled out from underneath his rock and did a news interview.
Yeah.
And that guy's can be a little shady sometimes, but he was talking about the issue because the WWE claims Ashley Massaro never made a formal complaint when that's bullshit. We know it's bullshit. So it seems like
Laurinaitis confirmed that wasn't true yesterday.
Yeah, I saw that. So, and it sure seems like old Johnny Ace is working super hard to save his own ass right now. He's reliving, 2000 All Japan right now and trying to protect himself while everyone else is getting out of ship. So, I don't think anyone could be surprised by this, to be honest with you.
He's, it's like he doesn't have Kawada to keep him company,
Mrs. Baba's not around to protect him anymore. So
yeah, Miss Bob is not around. Yeah, and that's a whole other scandal to talk about. But I think this was I just don't understand why they thought. I mean, when he got booted, he got fired. He had no real legal recourse. He's gonna do what he has to do to protect himself. Johnny Ace, and he did not have the best reputation in the history of the business, and the Janelle Grant allegations against him are horrible. And if anyone's read the 67-page complaint, I've read a lot of horrible criminal complaints in my time, and this is a civil complaint, and it's up there with the worst. But Ace, I think, is going to do what he has to do. Maybe he'll try to work with the feds. I don't know. Maybe he is. I have no idea. But it's going to be a long slog through this. Most grand juries take about a year. I have a feeling this might be a little sooner, depending on if it's just centered around Vince and maybe some of his key figure guys and just goes back a few years, maybe it's not as long. But I mean, you're looking at potentially years upon years upon years of evidence, of discovery, of witnesses, and and people had knowledge of this stuff all over the company. It was well known throughout the business, and and it's gonna be there's a lot of stuff that's gonna come out of this, and I think it's gonna shake a lot of people up. But I think WWE and N will be all right. There's creative people out there that can take over. Certain people can't, and they're gone. But yeah, it's definitely been a shocking couple weeks. I mean, things have moved pretty fast since Grant's lawsuit came out. But it's been time. I mean, what happened to her is pretty laid out. There's text message evidence. It looks like possibly video evidence. Just in the complaint alone, they had a lot of Vince's text messages. It doesn't look good for them.
No, it doesn't. And I don't know, there's a sick part of me that thinks that's really oh, chickens are finally coming home to roost. I don't understand how anybody could follow this company for any length of time and not just wholeheartedly go, yeah, I totally believe everything about this, because this has happened in some way, shape, or form since the since the mid 80s. So
yeah,
I mean, where does this go from here? The feds this stuff typically doesn't leak until the feds are ready to pursue a case. So, I mean, is this where we're headed next? I mean, will we see an arrest and an indictment of Vince McMahon soon?
I would imagine at some point. I mean, grand juries don't take much to do an indictment.
Ham sandwich. They say that the grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. That's the cliche.
Yes, unless you're a police officer with qualified immunity, it's very hard to get indicted, or it's very hard not to get indicted. And I don't, just based on the Grant allegations, I think that an indictment's probably going to be coming. I'd also say, based on just what happened with Grant, the way that it happened within the business, the way she was used within the business, the way this involved multiple people in the business, I think it could possibly be a RICO case. Now, a lot of the charges on here aren't normally associated with RICO cases, but that doesn't mean, the feds still couldn't try to push that. We really don't know until they present what they have, but I think this is going to go a long time, and I really think it's going to really shake up WWE in the wrestling business. They were kind of the last bastion of carnyism in their pro wrestling business. I think that's one reason why, former people there hated on places like AEW and TNA and other places so much, that kind of either cleaned up their act or started pretty new. And, nobody's perfect by any means, but, WWE's got a lot of dirt around that place. And, there's a lot of arrogance to think this was never going to come forward at some point. I think if people thought it was probably going to come after, Vince died. He is 78 years old. He's getting up there. He's had health issues, but sooner or later it was going to come out. And, here we are. And, some of us have been waiting 20 years on this, just to see if, not waiting, with my hands clasped together, hoping this happens and breaks through, but just thinking, sooner or later, this stuff's going to come out. Someone's going to complain, and, and the courts are going to pay attention. And so is law enforcement. And that's what's happened.
It's funny. People who don't know what a RICO case is, allow me to recommend the film The Dark Knight. They break it down pretty well in that movie.
Yes.
And Giuliani basically made his bones in a RICO case.
Yeah, he made his whole career in New York as a district attorney, using RICO to bust the mob in New York. But I don't know if that'll apply. I've had a lot of people I've talked to that think that's possibly going to happen, just with the Grant allegations, thinking, just how this was so wrapped up in company culture. And just talking to people through the years and what it was like. Paul London's recent, podcast, I think it was with Paul Roma. He shed a lot of light on just what happened with the divas and the other women's wrestlers. They were always stuck on planes with the execs. They were always stuck in the same hotel rooms. The pressure there. the fact that the Navy, according to Vice, they investigated Ashley Massaro's allegations when WWE for the last 15, 20 years has denied it. To me, that's a huge deal. I know that really rocked the company when it came out, and John Laurinaitis said, "Yeah, this happened."
Well, he said that they knew about the allegations. I really want to know what was in that investigation by the Navy, and I think David Bixenspan, who actually put in a Freedom of Information, a FOIA request to get that information, and I'm sure other people have too. He just talked about it yesterday with John Pollock, and so I'm hoping to get it, because it could have been like the investigation could have been as simple as, yeah, we read this, somebody brought it to our attention, we asked around, and we didn't get anywhere, because it was like at that point, like a decade old story, and it's really difficult to go back a decade like that to get all the details of it. So they might not have really went forward with the information. So I'd really like to know what happened with that investigation. And Dave Meltzer brought up something that I didn't even know about, that I guess before she had died, that she had actually apologized to the company for saying that. Did you guys ever hear that before? Because I had never seen that before.
I had never heard that until Dave reported it.
Yeah. I had never heard that before either, and I have not had the opportunity to look that up, but I thought that was crazy.
I want to know what happened with this investigation, because because again, she's a suicide, she died of suicide. She's clearly not of right mind at the time. Yeah. I would like to know what the Navy found out. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe you're right. Maybe there was nothing there. But I think Bix is going to find out about it, to be honest with you. Yeah. If you put in that FOIA request, it's coming pretty soon. This is bad, especially when you've got conspiracy. That's what we see all over the places, where they're openly denying that these things are happening, publicly, with a publicly traded company. This is bad. I have a hard time seeing the people in charge of this company now making it the year. I really do.
I think a lot of it's going to come down to what TKO's legal strategy is, which is, if we start firing people, then we look like we knew who was guilty and who was bad all the time. And otherwise, if you hang on to them and you wait till you have reason to get rid of them, with legal cover, then that changes things. I expect to see a lot of cleaning out in the, up in the C-suite. And I think there's going to be a lot of cleaning out in other areas too. But also I just, I think a lot of people are worried about WWE, what's going to happen with it moving forward. To me, that's not top of my concern right now. I'd like to see, I know there's a lot of women out there who are victims of this stuff. And I just hope that they're taking this opportunity to reach out to people, get, and men were also victims of this stuff. I think any of the victims, I'd like to see them go out, reach out, get mental help, talk to somebody. I'd also like to see people held responsible for this, so that this doesn't happen to anybody again. And I'd also like to see, and another thing is, there's a lot of women who wouldn't participate in this stuff, and it hurt them in their career, and it killed their career. And, they have a bone to pick with this too. The ones that got pressured, they got some benefits, but they got essentially assaulted. And then there's women that, because they wouldn't, bend to the pressure, they had their careers shortened or hurt, or went through abuse backstage in other ways. So hopefully that, we see some justice for them in this too.
Yeah, hopefully. And I know it is a tough thing for people to come forward. I hope that some people do, if they feel comfortable enough. The problem is that if and when they do, Vince's attorneys are going to try to rip them to shreds. And then not only that, his biggest defenders online, there's some really fucking fed-pilled losers out there. Just vile human beings that are willing to defend Vince at all costs. I've seen them in some of the videos that I've posted. I've actually started removing comments, because I'm like, yeah, I don't need that juju on my video. So that now they got to subject themselves to that, and when really they've just been trying to move on. But I hope there's at least a couple that are willing to come out and testify against him. If this ever does get brought up into an indictment, but you never know how this stuff's going to go. Here's the problem with Vince, is he's been Teflon, right? How many people in the world have been investigated twice for trafficking? Right? This is it, because the Ring Boy scandal was absolutely trafficking, but they were just they were just more interested in the steroid stuff because like that was the hot topic of the day, like the baseball scandals and stuff like that. They wanted to use they wanted to leverage, those people that were caught up in those scandals just to get information on Vince about the steroids, when they just should have focused in on that stuff. They could have taken down a lot of people that way. And I just don't I don't have any hope that he's going to go down, but I hope that, or I just contradicted myself, but I don't have like a warm fuzzy that this is actually going to go through, but I hope that it does.
With the bevy, if the bevy continues, Miss Callis talked about how they're getting phone calls from people every day. Now, who knows how many of those are like legitimate, but I mean, like, people are going to start coming out of the woodwork, right? There's been a lot of like weird little subtweets going on as it is. I don't know, man. I think this looks pretty bad for the entire company. I could see Ari just being like, okay, we're getting rid of all these people, clean culture. We didn't know it was like this before, until he'd save his own face, right?
Yeah.
Because again, they all knew that Vince was a problem, but they wanted the company. You keep Vince around because he got the company. Well, now they got the company, and they don't need to keep any of the baggage. So I think it's time you cull some of the baggage and then start from scratch, because there's a lot of rotten human beings who work there.
Yeah. I think that, I think for people inside the business, if you're living in the business, you're traveling all the time, you're in that window, it's just hard to imagine Vince getting taken down because he's always survived everything. He got kicked off the board and he was in 9 months or whatever. He's forced his way back in. Then he's on the TKO board. But, you cover enough of this stuff and you're outside of that window, the world looks a lot different. But when you're a professional wrestler, you're inside there and your career is always, one reason, and Conrad Thompson and Bruce Pritchett will show you this example, which is always kiss Vince's ass because he's the one secure paycheck that's out there, and, frankly, I'm getting sick of that whole side gig culture, and because I think it's poisonous and horrible and it's like disinformation, but that's one reason they do it. Vince was always that one dependable paycheck. Well, now you're seeing people like, Bischoff came out pretty hard against some of the some of the stuff that happened with Vince, but Cornette, he had the one mistake where he decided to put his live reaction out with Brian Last, but then they followed up with a pretty strong Last sounded absolutely sick talking about the case after he read it, and they said what a lot of people said, this thing looks dead to rights. That it doesn't mean it will be dead to rights. I mean, Vince has abilities. He's got a ton of lawyers. He's a billionaire. He's got a lot of resources, but that doesn't protect everybody. Harvey Weinstein had more than that.
Just going to say Vince McMahon is a pimple in the ass of Harvey Weinstein, and that guy's going to be in jail for the rest of his life. So, I mean, like, if that guy can go down, there's not a doubt in my mind Vince can go down because, people actually held Harvey Weinstein in higher regard than they've ever held Vince McMahon. Like, Vince McMahon's always been a carny. Like, he's fighting that perception his whole life. But that's just what the mainstream thinks of him. Don't let the Feifels of the world tell you different. Like, the mainstream has never respected Vince McMahon. I'm sorry. I hate Jimmy Van. Continue.
Yeah. So BJ, here's my question. If Vince does go down, God willing, if he does he take WWE down with him, or are they able to survive it? Because that's the thing about, he keeps getting compared to Harvey Weinstein, and I think that's a perfect comparison. Harvey Weinstein's company went under, right?
Yeah. I think that the TKO buyout, I think that gives them a much better shot because, they're already in other hands. They already have TV deals taken down. Now, the problem there becomes, okay, what happens with USA and Netflix and CW? Okay, we went under these deals under false circumstances that you guys had all this stuff taken care of, or false, pretenses or whatever you want to say. But to me, I think they'll survive. It's just that you got it's a huge property. It's more than just, despite what the McMahon family will tell you, WWE is more than the McMahon family. It's Steve Austin, it's the Johnsons, it's it's the families in the bloodline, it's the Rhodes family, it's a lot of people, and there's a lot of talented people back there that work. I mean, Adam Pearce, Gabe Sapolsky, Paul Heyman, they all have massive creative experience. There's ways they can survive, and TKO is a very rich company. It's going to be damaging, but they can bounce through this. And I mean, it's not hurting them in the ratings. It didn't hurt them in getting all those people in the arena tonight. Maybe once the federal case comes out, if they indict, which I think they will, maybe that hurts some things. Maybe that changes. But I mean, you're not seeing any of that coming across on Twitter or other social media places, like Mike said.
Oh, I think social media is a bad place to take the temperature of something
Well,
like
that's true
this,
too.
because it doesn't. The people who are talking about this, they care far more about who's Cody Rhodes going to fight at WrestleMania. Like,
Yep.
imagine if the wrestling media put as much effort into this kind of stuff, the effort that you've put in, because again, you have talking to all these people. You're an actual journalist, not one of these guys that plays journalist on Twitter and just wants to be a content creator. Like, and that's what's disappointing. But it sure feels like this is different this time, right?
I've tried, just to talk about wrestling journalists. I've had some noted comments and back and forth with a few, and one reason I've tried to push to them is that at some point you're going to be in a position where you're going to have to report on a story like this, because this is the professional wrestling business. I mean, there was points where we had dozens of wrestlers dying a year, and we're not talking guys in their 80s and 90s. We're talking guys in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And you're going to have to make the decision, okay, what do I do to live with myself? Do I cover this and try to, do the right thing? Or do I go ahead with my content creation and my social, engagement and hey, let's make sure we keep our access for those pressers where we don't ask any questions, But to me, it's just, it's going to have to change the media culture quite a bit. And and that's not just in wrestling, it's in sports and other places where it's getting more fan centered, influencer centered, and content creation centered. And God, I forgot what the other part of your question was, because I was ranting like an idiot. But
no, it's okay. I think that we're talking about Mike and I are kind of hard on the wrestling media, but I think at the same time, they're just serving what they think their fan base wants. And I think part of the problem is I think the fan base has a hard time looking at this not in the kayfabe world, which is crazy enough, because pro wrestling fought to keep this kayfabe veneer real for so long that they eventually gave it up. And now the fans are the ones that are like, hey man, we don't want the reality. We want to talk about behind the scenes of kayfabe. We don't want to talk about real life problems.
Oh, no.
Bothers me, to be honest with you.
I know people that are smart to the business, that have followed it and have inside sources and stuff, and they don't even want to acknowledge this is happening. They just, they've even read the Grant complaint and they're like, oh, that doesn't look like a real deal. That doesn't look like this or that. And it's just like, what planet are you on? It's like, now they're not going through my eyes looking through this. I've been in federal courtrooms. I've been in state courtrooms. I've been in there for murder cases and rape cases and sex abuse cases and other things. And, and they don't see it the way I see it. But, I think the reality is going to hit them at some point. And I understand where you're looking to WWE for an escape. It's not a good time to live right now. Politics are divided. It's gotten into sports. WWE is one of the few things that's just dumb, fun television. And, now this is happening. So, maybe that's why fans are reacting they did. I mean, when I had my initial column about this last week, I got absolutely torched. It was the same day the federal charges came out. I actually written it a couple days before that. And, I basically said, Vince, it was an editorial, and this is my opinion. I think Vince is going to go to jail, and I don't think there's going to be any McMahons left in the wrestling business. And, and I made my case out, but man, I got blown up for that. And to me, it looks like I don't think I said anything that was all that outrageous. But, this week, things have changed a little bit. I can tell you that much. It's like, okay, now another stone's unturned. Johnny Laurinaitis, there's that. And then, people are kind of taking in the fact that there's federal charges now. I can tell you right now, even among the main roster, a lot of them don't understand what's going on with the whole case. I mean, I don't even think many of them know that there are federal charges. And I think they're probably finding out more as this has gone on. Because you got to remember, these guys are traveling all the time. They got families. You know, you're talking about women and men, and they're on the road traveling all the time, dealing with their own problems. And, you know, they're thinking, oh, well, that's great. Paul's in charge now. I like him better than Vince. But it's not quite that simple. And, you know, I'm hoping none of this hurts any of them. But, you know, and I don't think it will. But yeah, I'm just glad this business is at a really strong point right now. I mean, that's one thing that's good. And that's for, you know, AEW. I think TNA showed that. I think what happened to Scott D'Amore, unless something else comes out, I think it was kind of ridiculous. But, you know, they've been doing great business. Yeah. You know, New Japan's just off to a very hot start to this year. They, you know, what they're doing in Chicago is phenomenal. You know, Mustafa Ali's, you know, should start his own promotion at this point. He's like the hottest indie act since Cody Rhodes. So, you know, there's a lot of great things happening in the business that can probably help, you know, buffer what's happening with WWE. But, you know, I mean, to me, that's not my biggest concern. My biggest concern is seeing justice for victims, seeing victims get help, and hoping that this is a way for them to reach out, for them to get, you know, to get some care, to know other people care, to get some justice. And, you know, and if they have to, you know, recover some of the lost earnings they did.
Yeah, absolutely. And BJ, I'll let you go on this. I just want to get your thoughts on this, because JD and I have been pretty hard on the media altogether. Is there just too many of them? Like, is that where we're at now? Because I remember when I was a kid, like, we had 12. Like, we had Meltzer and Keller and Bruce Mitchell and Mike Johnson and over on OneWrestling.com. And I think, you know, he ended up working for TNA, but like Bob Woodward. You guys remember him?
Yeah.
Not Bob Woodward. That's
Bob
Woodward
Ryder.
and Bernstein.
Bob
Ryder.
I was thinking of Woodward and Bernstein. I've been on a Nixon kick lately. Sorry.
Way different there, man.
Yeah, way different level. So is the barrier for entry to get in right now, is it just way too easy? Because now you got a couple of schmucks like JD and I having podcasts talking about wrestling, and all of a sudden people think we're journalists. Is that really like the problem right now?
Well, I think you guys are very smart on the business. You guys are very informed. Your CM Punk coverage was very good and very correct. So I think you're among some of the best.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the best podcasts on the internet for wrestling. I think you're definitely
I'm going to
top.
clip this and post it. Thank you.
Well, go right ahead. You can say that and put my name with it. But I do think there's people that are in this and are not in it because they want to report or do journalism or write. I mean, back in my day, you wanted to be Dave Meltzer or Bruce Mitchell if you were covering it. I mean, my heroes were guys like sports writers like Tom Archdeacon and Hal McCoy. And, you know, in wrestling, it was Dave and Bruce Mitchell. And depending on if you were an opinion columnist or you wanted to be a news reporter or writer. And I think right now it's just you have a lot of people that are just, you have too many people doing things that aren't journalism related that are saying they're media. And they're not media. They're nothing. They shouldn't be at press conferences. You know, if the girl can have an OnlyFans page and just do her reactions to stuff and then gets to ask 5 questions at a press conference, she shouldn't be there. You know, I mean, I'm nothing against what she's doing, but if she's not pressed, she's not asking anything. It's of substance. You know, just, you know, there's a lot of, and it's a shame because there's so many voices out there that are good. Samantha Shipman goes to a lot of AEW pressers and she holds them accountable on women's wrestling like nobody else in the business. She's fantastic.
Held me accountable to country fucking music.
So,
Still never gonna let that go.
But there's a lot of great voices and talented people that are caring about this stuff and know the issues and talk to people and understand the industry, and that's who we need to bring forward. But it's getting lost in the noise. And you're right, just with the whole social media stratus, it spreads a lot of things out. Where you guys have a very intelligent, you know, very knowledgeable, and it's a fun listen to show. But you're getting buried between, you know, guys that are talking about beer and whose knowledge of the business goes back to, you know, when AJ Styles started in WWE, you know?
Well, thank you very much, BJ, for educating the people. JD and I have been trying our best to talk about this case, but we needed somebody in here with a lot of experience and a little bit more of a knowledge base than JD and I to talk about the legal stuff. And I know that you cover like legit, like legal stories over there in Ohio. And so I thought you were the perfect guy to be able to bring on. I know you're still
I
digging on
appreciate
this
that. I
faith,
really do.
and we're looking forward to your to checking out more of your coverage, man.
Yeah, well, hopefully, as I said, I hope a lot of victims get help. I hope people are able to get some closure out of this, whatever happens. I hope whoever, responsible gets held responsible, and hopefully that happens. That's what I want to see happen. And, if that happens, that'll close a 20-year door that's haunted me in a big chunk of my adult life, my entire adult life. And that's, getting to live to see it would be a nice thing for me. I can say that.
Well, thank you very much, BJ. We're going to let you go. I just want to
Bye,
give some of your
guys.
credentials here. You can follow BJ on Twitter at BJ Bethel Tweets. And you can see some of his work on there. He's always posted his stuff. He's been a part of Melbourne's The Age, Sydney Morning Herald, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Washington Post. Shout out Bob Woodward, actually. Bob Woodward, who got a shout out earlier for his great coverage of Watergate. But
I only wrote for the Post once, but I'll take it. Sure.
Hey, it still counts.
Yeah.
I've never written for anything other than my own website, and I had an article one day in Voices of Wrestling that I think got like 13 views. So thank you very much for being here. You're a true gentleman, sir.
Well, thanks. You guys are great, and I love your podcast. You're fun, and you guys are good guys too. So hang in there.
BJ. Thanks,
Awesome,
BJ.
man. Take care.
Bye.
Take care. So that was
BJ. That was BJ Bethel, man. He was dropping some knowledge bombs on us. That was awesome.
I like talking to BJ because he's so much smarter than us, especially when it comes to like real journalism, and he actually does the work, right? And that's like, and he'll tell you what, I talked to Ann Callis's people, and I'm like, oh, okay, so you're actually talking to the people working the case, okay?
So that's what a real journalist does.
That would be correct.
Like, you got dipshits on Twitter alluding to shit, saying they know stuff, but not wanting to come forward with any information. They're just wanting to allude to it and being vague, and then they want to post links out there to their stupid fucking YouTube channels, and without actually doing any real reporting. And so that's why I want to talk to a guy like BJ, who's actually out there grinding, getting the actual information, talking to legitimate people, and getting the stories out. So everybody, make sure you follow BJ on Twitter, so you can check out some of his coverage, man. It's tremendous stuff, and he's been really doing well on these stories.
Yeah, agreed 100%. I love when we get to have BJ on the show. He's a great journalistic mind, and he's got a point. He calls some people out. He's doing the right thing. So I imagine this is not the last time we're going to talk to him about this case.
No, I think as we learn more, and we continue to follow him, and next time he breaks something, we'll have him on. So it's going to be awesome.
BJ mentioned the WWE would be all right with finding new creative voices. Well, it turns out Scott D'Amore is in need of a job.
Yeah.
So that's what I got out of the show today, and I was late because my kid wouldn't go to bed. And I couldn't help but notice our chat was just full of people wanting to talk TNA because that's our roots, that's our bread and butter. Mike,
and I actually wore my Brace for Impact shirt because I knew we would get into some TNA talk, man.
What happened?
So, I got a chance to listen to the flagship. So Joe Lanza actually talked to somebody within the company. Like Joe, they did some actual real stuff and talked to somebody in the company, right? And so we're gonna lean on him a little bit. So everybody check out the Voices of Wrestling flagship when it drops tomorrow. But I was able to check out their live feed earlier tonight. So yes, Scott D'Amore has been terminated as TNA president, and they have they hired, or they put in his place, a guy that's been basically in the Anthem umbrella for like 16 years. His name is Anthony Siccione. So it's a little Italian on Italian crime here with Siccione taking D'Amore's job. And now we got JD Oliva, another Italian to talk about it. Hey. So here's I gathered some of the info. I'm gonna look at my notes here. So apparently D'Amore wanted to keep the company growing, and he wanted to get another budget increase, right? Because they've got a little bit of momentum. Hard to Kill, they're over 30,000 buys on Hard to Kill, which is pretty freaking tremendous for a television show that struggles to get 100,000 live viewers every week, right? It's on a super small network. And they also sold 1,700 tickets there in the Pearl at the Palms, and so We're like, hey, we got momentum. We need to keep it going. We need a bigger budget. We need to sign more talent. We need better lighting. We need better cameras. We need all this stuff.
They do.
Yeah, and because I'll be honest, so the Las Vegas show is Hard to Kill, and then the subsequent episodes, they looked really good, right? Like it doesn't look as good as AEW. It
Right.
looks like a third tier wrestling promotion. So it looked better than New Japan in the States, right? It's a much better production than New Japan in the States. But it looked, in between like AEW and MLW. They're like right there as far as their look. It looked better than what it was before, but it's still not as good as where it could be if you want to be a major promotion, right? Well, since they've gotten to Orlando and they did those tapings in Orlando, they taped a month of episodes. It basically looks like Impact Wrestling era with a TNA logo. It's a dark arena. There's not that many people there. The crowd that is there is pretty loud, but it still looks, third rate essentially.
Yeah.
So I could see where Scott D'Amore's coming from. It's like, hey, we just did this, but the guy that they brought in, now this is according to Lanza. And so the Siccione guy, he's more of a bean counter, and he's looking to come in and cut the budget and to get the finances right because they're tired of losing money on this TNA gig. TNA and Impact was, and always will be, according to Anthem, cheap programming for Access and Fight Network.
Correct.
That's what it is. I think Scott D'Amore was trying to make it something more. He was trying to make it bigger than what they ever intended it to be, and they're not willing to take any more losses on that. So they want to cut the budget because they don't see any return on investment. So they did a corporate restructuring, essentially moving TNA into the Anthem into the entertainment wing of Anthem. So it wasn't the sports wing. Now it's moved over to the entertainment wing under Siccione. Excuse me. And then I'll let you talk in just a sec, JD. D'Amore knew that he was losing power. Actually, this is another thing that came out in PW Insider. He had known for a couple of weeks that he was losing power, and he actually approached Anthem with an offer to buy TNA outright. He actually had financial backing from a bank. I don't think a lot of people know that Scott D'Amore is independently wealthy. Like his family is a big real estate, they're real estate moguls in the Windsor area, the Detroit Windsor area. He took over his dad's business. He's been running it very successfully for a long time. He doesn't need this shit. So he could have actually, he felt like he had the money to go ahead and purchase TNA, but it appears Anthem wasn't interested, which is funny because I heard early in the morning that Anthem was interested in selling, but then I heard that no, they were listening to a sales pitch by Scott D'Amore, and they essentially they turned him down and then they fired him, basically.
So what I'm hearing is like they were never really in contention for guys like Osprey or Mercedes or Okada. Like this was just like stuff we were Punk. Like, because if they're coming in and saying, well, we need to cut the budget now, like what would you have done if you'd have got a 7-figure talent on board?
Yeah.
A
lot of the information is conflicting out there, right?
Big time.
Yeah. So, and maybe they were interested in Punk, right? And Osprey. Maybe they thought that, hey, we would get a return on investment. I think they would have with Punk. I don't think they would have with Osprey. And that has nothing to do with talent. It's
you got to build Osprey here. You got to build Osprey in this country. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and they just don't have the infrastructure to be able to do that, right? So, but I think they could have with Punk, and maybe they were interested in signing CM Punk because, when CM Punk was in the UFC was on Fight Network, right? So they see CM Punk and they probably see dollar signs and they're willing to go ahead and make that investment. But whenever they missed out on all those talents, and then next thing you know, we're getting Ziggler and Ali, and we're paying them a lot of money, and they're not seeing the return on investment, which is weird that they would cut bait within a month. So I think we're going to find out a lot more about what really happened there. But Lanza's saying that this guy's just a bean counter and he's wanting to come in and kind of and get the budget right. And that Anthem wasn't. And then PW Insider, as Dobby was saying, PW Insider saying that basically D'Amore wanted it to be this big thing and Anthem just wasn't willing to play ball. And so that's, essentially what led to the break there.
It's funny because that was like when Don Callis talked about him and D'Amore's pitch to Anthem to run the thing. The idea was to run small, right? Run lean. So it sounds like Scott wanted to be bigger, and they were just like, no, we don't want to be bigger. We also don't want to sell to you. Yeah. So like this, it's interesting. I don't think it's good, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if this guy's coming in cutting budgets, I mean, so here was the fun thing about watching Impact in TNA. Part of it was seeing them grow every year, right? Seeing the improvements that they would make over time, right? And then 2023 was like, I don't think creatively it was a very good year. I thought 2022 creatively was very good, but 2023 was pretty bad. Yeah, and broke JD. I think 2024 was primed to be their most successful year, and it just seemed like D'Amore just kept asking every single year for more and for more and for more. And then this year, that kind of like it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And then he saw the writing on the wall that they were never going to be fully invested into this this thing that he loves so much, that he would rather just buy it and then try to get his own TV deal, which is beyond me, because it's not going to get a TV deal. The only reason it exists is because Anthem bought access. It was not like the show doesn't look good enough that for like a Fox to buy, right? Like they would actually have to pour a bunch of money into the production to increase, the way it looks and things like that for anybody to be interested. And right now they're not doing that. I mean, look, Tony Khan tried pitching Ring of Honor. Nobody wanted that, right? Like it's difficult to get a TV deal. They don't just grow on trees, right? Tony Khan just happened to have the right resources. And he said, look, I'm going like all in, right? Like I'm going all in, like I'm putting all my money into this, and I'm going to make it look like it's this big budget thing, and I'm going to sell it to a broadcaster. And that's what he did. And Anthem just not willing to take that kind of risk. They're just not.
No. And I get it. It's their money.
Yeah.
Right. Like it makes sense to me, but at the same time, it's like, where does this go? It doesn't sound like they're in a really healthy position right now based on that.
Well, morale is at an all-time low, right? And here's the crazy thing, I've stuck with the Impact podcast. Impact podcast and TNA podcast been kind of boring because it's been relatively drama-free. You don't have superstars, punching out, job guys named Jungle Boy, right? You don't have, or lunging at the owner. You're just not getting all of that.
Those are fun shows.
Yeah. And then going to WWE, like you're not really getting any of that. It was like, it's a small roster, it's a tight knit roster, and they were all basically family. And I think John Muse says it perfect right here in the chat. Said there was a family atmosphere, and then a lot of that starts with Scott, and he cared about the company and history. Yeah. Essentially, Anthem removed the one guy that loved TNA the most, right, and got rid of him. He was the guy that cared about it. And he was the one that wanted to bring it back, and he really wanted it to be kind of like maybe not take over. Like nobody thinks they're ever taking over AEW, but to be kind of like a player in the industry that isn't just a transition home for talent, right? Because that's what TNA has been. It's been a transition home for talent in between WWE runs. And he was hoping to make it a destination place.
So I guess here's my question to you: is Scott had his hands in a lot, including the booking. Who takes over as booker now that he's out?
Well, it looks like it's going to be Dreamer and Gail Kim, which they've been on the booking committee already. So they just lost Scott. So Dreamer was kind of like in charge of that. And now who knows who ideas or what. I think they need to overhaul that booking committee completely, because I think they have a lot of tired ideas. And my problem with TNA, as much as I praised Hard to Kill, I think, and then the matches that they had, I didn't think they came out of it with very good stories. And I think that's been a problem in that company for a long time. And it's been a problem, honestly, since Don Callis left. Because ever since he left, it's been pretty much paint by numbers. Everything's just been super safe, right? I can count on one hand how many awesome stories that they've told in like the last 3 years. And now they've had a lot of great matches, right? But every company has great matches. And that's not the most important thing. They haven't really had anybody coming in and they never really give you anything to invest yourself into, right? And I'll take like NXT, for example. NXT sucks.
Yes.
But the Trick Williams, Carmelo Hayes storyline sucked people in and had a tremendous payoff, right? And now they're continuing with this feud. Like you don't like you kind of had that with Moose and Josh. Like I think that we felt burned at first, but eventually they told a great story there. But outside of that, they haven't really told many great stories. And
that's 3 years ago, right? Like that was 2021-ish.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I mean, what since? This is when we did Brace for Impact every week. This is what I would talk about. It's like we're going nowhere.
Yeah.
Like nothing is progressing. Like I got real excited for the Honor No More thing, and then circumstances kind of killed that before it had a chance to be. Like I just don't know. I don't see the path forward, especially without like a good leader up front. And I don't think that's Tommy Dreamer. I just don't.
Yeah, he's a guy that you keep in, the talent like him, and they'll work for him. But you need like a fresh creative, like a younger creative mind, right? And not just like another guy off of the WWE fired shelf, right? Like if I were them, and I don't know if this information will ever get to them, but I know that some people listen to us. I actually know people in that company. If I were them, I'd be looking at like, your Deadlock Pro Wrestling, like who's booking on the indies right now, doing cool stories and actually drawing money. Who out there can you bring their ideas to your company? Something fresh and exciting, instead of just rehashing shit from WWE television and then rehashing guys from WWE main event. Tonight on TNA, and I haven't watched the show yet. Tonight on TNA, they had Simon Gotch attack Josh Alexander.
Ugh.
And now they're starting a feud, and it looks like they're going to be wrestling at the next live event, right?
Who wants that?
Nobody. No, nobody. And they're doing a feud between Big Con and PCO, and I'm just like, look, I love PCO. PCO is great, but there's nothing more boring than Big Con. Like he's just a big lumbering oaf that nobody likes.
Right. And he's said that for 2 years on the show. Like I just don't see. And like someone said, oh, they could bring in Delirious again. I'm like, oh, did you watch those Ring of Honor shows? Delirious
has been there. He's on the committee. Yeah.
And it makes sense that the shows are boring because he's boring booker. Like I don't. Without Scott, I mean, like I had my qualms with the show, but I mean, like he was a calming presence in the locker room, and people liked him. So when you're not getting paid a lot, it's good to at least like where you go to work. And we seem to be stuck.
Yeah. Well, and so here's one of the problems. They're going to be facing multiple problems going forward. A lot of the talent had other opportunities elsewhere, and they signed with TNA because they respected Scott D'Amore because he is their coach, right? He is like Moose. Not only trained, was trained by Scott D'Amore. Scott D'Amore worked as his agent for a long time, brought him into TNA, and he's been there, and he just signed the longest deal in TNA history because he felt like Scott D'Amore was going to be there, right? Josh Alexander runs Scott D'Amore's Wrestling Academy in Windsor. So he's there. Jade Chung is Josh Alexander's wife, who is super close to Scott D'Amore. Giselle Shaw's, competing for the Knockouts Championship. That's Scott D'Amore's girlfriend, right? Like Jordan Grace, like had opportunities elsewhere, stayed with TNA because of Scott D'Amore, right? So like you're gonna like when a lot of these contracts come due, they're probably gonna want to, go either wherever Scott is, or they're probably not going to be as loyal as they once were. When maybe they probably shouldn't have been so loyal anyway. Always take care of your business, but they wanted to be with Scott because he was, like you were saying, that calming presence. Like he looked out for them. He took care of them. Even if I had a lot of like issues with their booking, I just find it to be boring. But yeah, I know it really is a tough deal. Now, if they come in and they bring in somebody young and exciting with a bunch of new ideas, right? Like, I talked about it earlier this week on the Patreon, and like a breaking news audio. I was like, look, this is like removing Dusty Rhodes and bringing in Jim Herd, right? Bringing in a TV exec. That's exactly
what it is.
It's exactly what they did. Okay, when do they go to Kip Fry? And at one point do they try Bill Watts? And then when do they get to Eric Bischoff, right? And I mean, like early stage Eric Bischoff, who had fresh ideas, who did a lot of cool things, who created this party-like atmosphere before he, realized he was a fucking mark and got manipulated by everybody and blew up the company. Like, but how do they get to that point? You know what I mean?
Don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. Like, I just want to see them do something interesting because it seemed like they had a lot of momentum, and now they don't seem to have a lot of anything. And losing Trinity is a big part of that too. Like, it seems like we just got reinvigorated. And now we're back down, and now with the morale is down, and I just don't like where this looks like it's headed.
Yeah, it's not looking good. I'll have more as more details come out. I'll talk about it this weekend on Brace for Impact. But here, let's go to the chat. We've had a lot of people in the chat all night. We had BJ on, and so we haven't really had a chance to talk to people in the chat. Let's see. So David Hadley says, Dreamer's creative is all like Bully Ray's, very goofy. Yeah, Dreamer doesn't have a good record. He booked OVW for a while and it was trash too. And I think he did a lot of the booking in ECW and it doesn't hold up very well.
No.
Antonio Bang Bang Niner Gang says Dreamer ass on TV enough for the old heads in wrestling. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Josiah's in the chat. He said tonight's episode was more paint by numbers. It was fine. Nothing exciting. And that's been the thing with TNA and with Impact for a long time. It's fine. Like it's an easy watch. It's never like very bad. It's also rarely ever like very, very good. It's always pretty good. That's been the thing. And then there's been some pay-per-views that I thought were awesome, but nobody gave it a shot because it's always typically fine. You know,
life's too short to watch mediocre independent wrestling. It just is.
Yeah. Dobby in the chat says, I'm curious if this is where they bring back Sammy Callahan because Revolver has been killing it. That's pretty interesting. Wrestling Revolver has, because Wrestling Revolver and, Game Changer Wrestling and Deadlock Pro Wrestling, they have access to AEW, TNA, and New Japan talent. They're able to book some pretty compelling stuff. I would like to see if not Game Changer. I think they did some cool stuff, but it's mostly like, gutter trash. But, if Sammy Callahan wanted to come in, get a shot, or somebody from Prestige or somebody from Deadlock, I'd be real interested in that. Just don't do the intergender shit and the deathmatch shit. I'm not interested.
Agreed.
Yeah. King of the North says, hire Chris Hero. I think he has a job.
Me too. I think
he works Ring of Honor. That's why Rachel Ellering's back on TV. Yeah. And then here we got John Muse in the chat says it depends on what they want. If they want cheap TV, being Anthem, the creative doesn't mean much. If they want growth and quality, they need to invest in people with a plan and ideas. You know who they should hire, now that I think about it, to take over creative? John Muse.
Oh yeah, that's 100%.
Yeah, that's what they should hire. Somebody with fresh ideas. You know?
I advocate that. I think John Muse should be the new booker of TNA. They won't. But
let's start the hashtag We Want John. He'll kill us if we try that.
He will murder both of us in our sleep.
Yeah. So it looks like we went a little overtime, and that's fine. We will we'll keep it rolling. I want to get to our last topic. AEW. Oh, you know what? Let's Rossy Ogawa. Let's talk about Rossy, just because I put him on the thumbnail. I don't want to forget that we were talking about Rossy Ogawa. It looks like Rossy, he got fired by Stardom. We talked about it earlier in the week. And he's not exactly poaching talent yet, but a lot of talent has agreed to go with him to his next promotion that he is starting. Most famously is going to be Julia. Instead of going to WWE, she's sticking with Rossy Ogawa. And I think King of the North said it in the chat, Scotty Ogawa, Rossy and Scott D'Amore seem to be very comparable in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, Rossy wanted control. Like, he sold his company, made a lot of money, and found out he wasn't going to be able to control it. So then he's like, okay, fine, I'm out. And it's like, I quit. Well, you can't quit. You're fired. One of those kind of deals. So I don't know, man. I wish I knew more about Joshi to have more of a take on this, but I don't. I just, I don't know. It's more this pro wrestling hellscape that 2024 has been.
Yeah, it's been wild because, we started the year off, with Obari getting canned from New Japan, although they said it was mutual parting of the ways. He got fired. And of course, Vince gets removed from Power and TKO. And then Rossy Ogawa and now Scott D'Amore. I think we need to check in on Tony Khan, make sure he's okay.
Tony Khan's probably been a little busy last week. He's having a good time. His Twitter was entertaining. So and his show Dynamite this week was one of the best that I've ever seen. I think it was great. I thought it was, top to bottom. I thought it was just a badass show, man. Yeah, I agree. A great show.
Guys in the chat, has AEW restored your feeling? That's been Suit Williams has been talking about that, like that AEW has restored the feeling. And I think caught in all the chaos that is pro wrestling, as the pro wrestling world is burning down around everybody, I think that AEW is finally back on track and is kind of reigniting my interest in that promotion. Because I'll be honest, by the end of last year, I was no longer interested in it. But this year, I think they've really got me back.
Yeah, it's been a good year so far. It's only February. It's been a crazy year so far, but it's only February, so got to see where it keeps going.
Yep. Dobby in the chat says, big issue for Tony. Show's been great lately, but fans aren't coming back yet. Well, that takes time, right? You gotta have sustained superior performance, and then eventually people will come back. Last night's episode was one of the best they've had, and the rating was a complete disappointment. But it's not this week that matters. It's what they do next week, right? It's like, can they carry over?
You got to
build word of mouth and water cooler talk to tell people to keep watching.
You got to build momentum, and it takes. When you've lost your momentum, it takes months and months to build it back, and that's when they lost a lot of their momentum, and it's not going to turn around in 6 weeks. Like they're not going to start changing that around until probably June.
Yeah. King in the North said, I'm not all the way back, but Tony Khan is getting some goodwill back from me. That's good. IO Productions. IO says, y'all left out Nick Houseman, Mike. Yeah. IO wanted me to make fun of Nick Houseman, and I would love to make fun of Nick Houseman. So Nick was one of the guys that flew himself from Chicago to Las Vegas on his own dime for his own shitty little website to go be a part of the pep rally. And then when he found out that he couldn't ask any questions, he just left.
I don't blame him for leaving. I mean, better than sticking around and being a complete and total mark the whole weekend. So
yeah, he's been brutal on this TNA stuff. He's been really latching on to this story that he wrote with the guy Kid Ref. You remember that little kid referee? Well, he was saying that because there was a sexual harassment case in Impact back in the day, and then and I know the names are involved in that case, but I can't really say them. But the names are out there if you just look them up. But and Kid Ref said that it was kind of a sham investigation. Well, and that Scott D'Amore and Don Callis and all these other people are all these evil people. But then he willingly admits that Kid Ref is a piece of shit and that maybe that guy is also full of it. So I don't know what to believe. Maybe it was a sham investigation. I don't know. But apparently, and Bixispan has been on this too. So there was a sexual harassment case, and they brought in somebody who they reported as an independent HR firm to investigate it. Well, it turns out the HR person was somebody that they knew, who also now works with their company. That's a little fishy. I just don't know that D'Amore had anything to do with that. He was the EVP of Impact, but that's all legalese anthem stuff. I didn't like now if D'Amore was the perpetrator, which that's never been even rumored, then maybe we got some, but it didn't appear like D'Amore had anything to do with that. But Nick Houseman wants to connect the dots and point the fingers at D'Amore, but he's not really presenting a case. He's just alluding to it like a fucking loser that he is.
That's what he does.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a shit show. I don't know.
Yeah. And Larry Dallas took him to task. So thanks, Larry Dallas. But Antonio, I see your comment on the chat. I'm not going to put that up there, but because we're on the same page. Yeah, we're on the same page. Guys, I don't know if you guys can see, but JD's falling aslead, and
I'm struggling.
It's time for him to go to bed.
I'm so hurting today, man.
It's okay. I just wanted to make sure we got through all of our topics. I had like a list. I advertised the topics, and I wanted to make sure that I hit them. So so I don't think we're doing overtime tonight. So me and JD will try to do that some other time, but we'll try to get more into our Sting series. JD, I want you to do the big hard sell. We got something cool happening on Patreon.
Yeah.
Coming up soon. Talk about it.
I think we'll probably launch maybe tomorrow. I had some success with an old documentary that I did about 12 years ago, and it caught a little bit of fire just on Facebook forums and stuff like that. And it's been kind of fun. So I said, hey, I got other ones that I could throw it out to. And Mike goes, yeah. I said to you, I'm like, hey, can I put it on our YouTube page? And you're like, yeah, let's put it on the Patreon. I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. So in 2010, I got a phone call from a third grade teacher in a small town in Iowa. This school was a pretty good little wrestling school called Independence. They were trying to get their community to pass a referendum to help build a new high school. And the referendum had failed. So their idea was, we're going to make a documentary talking about our program and, why our school needs to be better. So they shot all this stuff, but they had no idea what to do with it. So I developed a little bit of a reputation in the wrestling community as a documentary guy, and they called me and said, hey, can you help us with this? And so I went out there and talked to them, and I figured, well, you got the bones of a documentary, but you don't have like the meat. So I moved out there. I lived out there for about 2-3 weeks, and I got a vibe on the town, and I finished their story for them. I Cody Rhodes it. Like, I brought my production crew in, and we just we redid some interviews, and I found the narrative thread of the story and put it together. And it was we actually screened the movie about 6 months later in a theater in that town, and it moved the town. They passed the referendum and built a new high school. So, and it was it's a pretty damn good little documentary. So again, I watched it this week for the first time in a decade easily. And it's aged all right. So I want to give a chance to you guys to check it out before I start bugging people in my personal life to watch old work of mine. So it'd be something cool we could do. So I appreciate your idea on that one, Mike.
Yeah, Independence, a wrestling with a community, is going to be by the time. So if you're not watching live, if you're just checking this out on the Voices of Wrestling podcast feed or the Mike and JD Show podcast feed, you can go to patreon.com/the Mike and JD Show, and it will be up. I'm actually going to put it up as soon as we're done with this. We're done with this podcast. The video is already ready to go. It's already uploaded. I just got to post it, and it's going to be on Patreon. So please check it out. Plop your $5 down and support JD's project. A lot of people he's very happy with it. It's a great documentary. I think you guys will really enjoy it. And I think more of that more of that to come. We might start putting up some more of JD's classic stuff up on the Patreon.
Why not? I got stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you everybody, all the brothers in the chat. I really do appreciate you. Oh, sorry, my mouse just quit. I'm trying to get out of here. Thanks to everybody in the chat. I really do appreciate you. Patreon.com/the Mike and JD Show. And until next week, mahalo.
Competition starting to get thick, it's the click, so I hope you watch your A game. Make no rain from the track when we unite and spit. This isn't A game, better bring your A game. Competition starting to get thick, it's the click, so I hope